The week before Purim, we had begun this idea of looking at the Psalms, looking at the Tehlim, that I know many people say, and understanding them a little more deeply. And then we stopped that because it was Purim, so we focused on Purim. And now we're going to focus back on the Psalms until we start focusing on Passover. So we got a few weeks. So what we did 2 weeks ago was we began Psalm Tehillim 120. And we learned the first verse of it, a song of ascents. In my distress, I cried to God and he answered me. And we discussed it. We had actually a very beautiful discussion on this idea of when we're distressed, the natural, like, knee-jerk response of man, of the Jew and of all men, is to turn to God and be answered. So now we're up to the second verse. And this is a short psalm. This is one of what we call the Shir HaMa'alot, the songs of ascent. There were 15 steps leading up to the area of the temple, and Levites stood on those steps, and on each one they sang the next song of these songs of ascent. And what we're doing now is the first song of ascent, really expressing this idea of the upward movement, the movement close to God, the movement towards the temple. It's the Lubavitch Rebbe's psalm of this year. It's a very powerful, beautiful psalm, and it has 7 verses, and we just did one, so now up to the second one. God, rescue my soul from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. That is going to be really the theme of this psalm, the deceitful tongue, how people create so much harm by their words. And here King David is praying to God to be saved from all of this pain, all of this harm that comes from deceitful tongues. So as the commentators explain this idea, the Talmud says that God said, tongue, I enclosed you in 2 gates, a hard one and a soft one, meaning we have the gate of our teeth, and we have the gate of our lips. So there's a double gate around our tongue, but it doesn't stop it. It still keeps talking. We still say harmful things. We still do things that can harm other people with our tongue. And the Radak says that what the psalm is talking about are people that make up these libels against the Jewish nation, which of course we have suffered, for all of our years of exile. We've had so many horrific libels, lies said about the Jews, and so much harm done to the Jews because of these lies. And of course that continues until today. So according to the Radak, that is what we're saying here. You're constantly making up lies against the Jews with your tongue. You're constantly fabricating non-existent crimes. The Midrash says that God's saying to the tongue, like, what's your pleasure in this? What are you gaining from this? If someone steals because they're hungry, if someone commits a crime out of passion, what are you gaining from talking bad words against other people? Of course, we could say there is a pleasure in that. Unfortunately, there is a pleasure in harming others, and there's a pleasure in talking about others and talking things that harm others. So did anyone here ever have an experience when they realized how damaging was their tongue? When they said something and realized afterwards how much they harmed someone? Perhaps unwittingly, perhaps at the moment it was in anger. Froma?
Oh, I wasn't going to share. I mean, I've just noticed, like, saying things, you have to watch. I mean, I'm not perfect with it. I still do things that I shouldn't say, but I've seen, the repercussions.
You've seen that you've said things and how people have gotten hurt.
Yeah. Or that hurt me.
Or that have hurt you. Right. That would be my next question. You've seen that people have said things that hurt you, and you've seen that you've said things and hurt others. So you see it works, and it does work, unfortunately. Anyone else has had an experience when they said something and they realized afterwards, like, whoa, I didn't mean to create such harm. I didn't mean to do something. Chava?
Yes, for me, unfortunately, I don't even think I say something negative, and sometimes it hurts people. So that's how careful we need to deal with what we're saying and how it could be received.
That is so true. So Chava's saying something slightly different from Fruma, because Fruma's saying that sometimes she said something and she's really hurt people by it. But Chava's saying sometimes I say things I'm not at all trying to hurt anyone. There's no intention here of hurt, and it hurts sometimes. And how careful we have to be. Rivka, you've had a similar experience?
And I just wanted to say that not only words that I say could be hurtful, but the tone of the voice. Yeah, that's
Sure.
what that experience, the tone.
Absolutely. It could be the words, it could be the tone, it could be the facial expression, it could be the body language.
Yes, yes.
Yes, all of those things hurt. And we, like Chava said, we have to be so careful, especially, of course, if we know we're dealing with a sensitive person, someone in our life that we know is sensitive, then we have to be like quadruple careful. But many people are sensitive. So I think the general assumption is that people are sensitive, that people get hurt. Not everyone shows that they get hurt. Many people don't show it, but they get hurt. And I think Chava's point is very, very strong, very well taken. That there is, of course, times when maybe we're angry and we say something too sharp, or maybe we're being thoughtless and we say something not nice or mean or ill-spirited. And sometimes we truly don't mean anything negative at all. It could be the words, or as Rivka's saying, it could be the tone, it could be the eyes, it could be the body language, and another person could get very hurt. Fruma?
Yeah, so my question is, I guess, in a situation let's say where somebody does, I guess, hurt your feelings, like they talk to you in a not nice way or they say not nice things to you, and you feel like they know that they weren't so nice, do you feel like it's necessary to tell them sometimes, like, hey, that wasn't the best situation, to try to fix things, I guess?
If someone said something that hurt you and you're pretty sure they were intending to hurt you.
Yeah, like it was pretty obvious.
It's pretty obvious they were intending to hurt you. Is there still a point in saying it? Yes, I definitely think there is. As long as you're dealing with a reasonably, healthy, normal person, yes. Meaning some unhealthy people really want to hurt. They really do want to hurt. So telling them, you hurt me is exactly what they wanted. But besides those people, most people, even if at the moment they want to hurt you, underneath that, they're a regular, normal person who, of course, doesn't want to hurt someone. And they wouldn't even admit to themselves that they want to hurt someone. So people are complex. So when you say, I'm sure you didn't mean it, because you don't want the person to get defensive, because defensive people aren't listening to you. They're just defending themselves. So you don't want to, trigger someone's defensive mechanisms. But when you say, I'm sure you didn't mean it, but when you said that, or as Rivka's saying, the tone you said it in, or the way you looked at me when you said that, it was really very, very hurtful. And I hear your message, but I just wanted you to know that the way you did that hurt me. I'm sure you didn't mean it, but it hurt me very deeply. No, I think that's a very good thing to tell someone. If you say it like that, not if you're all mad or screaming nasty back or lose it. No, all that's not good. But if you really can be calm and controlled, I think it's very good to tell someone if they hurt you, because I think most people don't want to hurt other people. So even when they did want to hurt you, it was just, that irrational piece of man. It wasn't the real person. And I think saying those words sort of creates that whoa, shock effect of oh wow, I didn't mean to hurt you. Because underneath wanting to hurt you, I don't think they want to hurt you, if that makes sense. But if someone's truly unhealthy and no, they have a true desire to hurt people, then I wouldn't bother. So what about the other end of the story, which from already shared, but has anyone here, you don't have to share the details, but anyone here ever been hurt by how other people have suffered from other people's speaking about them or libeling them, slandering them, talking about them, or just the way they were spoken to in a way that really, really hurt them? Anyone had that experience? From us that she did, I definitely have had. Anyone else? Rachel?
Yeah, I had that happening, but sometimes I can hear that people tell me that I'm too sensitive. So of course, it depends on how sensitive the person is who thinks that he was hurt. Some
That's
people
true.
would not pay attention to what was said or what was done. And I always notice.
That's true. And that goes back to what Chava was saying, how sometimes people hurt people not meaning to, but many people in the world are sensitive. So you're saying you have been hurt, and maybe the hurt is coming because have a higher sensitivity. It could be. And that's good for you as a person when you're feeling hurt by someone, to tell yourself that. That's a good thing to say, to like, judge the other person favorably, and to say, it's possible they didn't mean it. It's possible I'm overreacting. It's possible I'm reading into it more than they meant. Sometimes we do read into things more than the other person meant, and that does create hurt. That is self-created hurt. That does sometimes happen.
Yeah.
But the point here is, the reason why I wanted to discuss this is because this is what the psalm is speaking about now. Hi, Rena. So nice you made it on. This is what the psalm is speaking about, and just to bring it home, yes, we can relate to this. We can relate to it as sometimes we hurt others. We can relate to it as sometimes we've been hurt. We can relate to it sometimes from both ends. Now, the psalm, does the psalm really mean on that level of interpersonally? Yeah, absolutely. It also could mean the other nations slandering us and harming us and spinning lies, as has happened through all of our history, to do us grievous, deliberate harm. It means that as well. But it also means for us to be very aware of the power of our words. And I know I think about this more than I do anything about it, but I do think about this sometimes. I just wish I was more able to think before I say, because sometimes we say things just not appropriate, not what we should say, but we just talk, and then afterwards we like, oops, I should have thought before and not after. So we all probably could use some focus on our own tongues and the power of our words. And as Chava said, very often totally not meaning, but that we really can hurt others. Okay, the next verse. The arrows of the mighty are sharpened with coals of rotem wood, a certain type of wood, as we'll discuss. The arrows of the mighty are sharpened. So the Midrash says that when we're talking about negative words, slanderous words, we refer to it metaphorically as arrows. If someone's talking about gossip, it's referred to as arrows. So why is it referred to as arrows specifically? Because if a person wanted to harm someone and they took out a sword, God forbid, it's in their hand. So if they decide not to harm, if the other person begs them for mercy, or they have a change of heart, or they have regret, they can put back the sword. They pulled out the sword, they can put back the sword. They're the master of the sword. But that's not so with an arrow. If you shoot an arrow, it's gone. If afterwards you feel so bad, you feel so regretful, well, the arrow is gone. You cannot take it back. And that, our sages say, is the power of words. If someone, God forbid, says slanderous talk about someone else, libelous talk about someone else, gossip about someone else, lies about someone else, negative words about someone else, it's out of your hands. Once you said it, it has a life of its own. You made a comment and you feel so bad. You didn't mean to sound as negative. Who heard the comment? Who repeated the comment? Who heard the repeated comment? Who repeated that comment? It goes and goes and goes. It has a life of its own. You know, there's a famous story of a woman who had gossiped in a way that really hurt other people and she felt really bad. And she went to a rabbi in her village to ask for a way to atone for this. And the rabbi said, oh, you want to atone for your speech? She said, yes. He said, okay, go to the middle of the marketplace and take a feather pillow and slash it open. She's like, what? That's not atoning for my speech. The rabbi, she's gonna listen. She goes to the marketplace, she takes a feather pillow, she slashes it open. How did this help her speech? She has no clue. She goes back to the rabbi. The rabbi says, okay, now gather all the feathers. She's like, gather all the feathers? How can I gather those tiny feathers that went all over the marketplace? He said, that's the point. Once you speak, you don't even have control over it. It's gone. And that's why it's the psalm here is comparing it to arrows, something that is gone. And that's why it's so damaging, because you can't really take it back. Rabbeinu Yonah in the Gates of Repentance says that slander from a certain perspective is viewed as worse than idolatry, adultery, and murder. That sounds pretty bad. And he says that one of the reasons is because of exactly this point, that if a slanderer wants to repent, it's really hard. How do you take back words once they were said? How do you know who they were said to? How do you know where they traveled? And if you spoke bad about someone who doesn't realize, you're going to go and tell them you said all these bad stuff about him. So how do you repent? So it's really, really hard to repent from things we should never have said. Even in a relationship. If you would say to your husband or to a child very harsh words, it's really hard to take those words back. And they heard them. They know you said them. It's really hard to take those words back because you didn't mean it. You were upset. You were triggered. They heard the words. They could stay in their heart forever. You know, people could talk about words that their parents said to them 50 years ago. People could talk about words their spouse said to them 10 years ago. You know, that's really hurtful words. They stay in our heart. So that's why we really have to be so careful if we're upset at someone, not say anything. Just don't go there, because you mean it now, but you're not going to mean it tomorrow. But once you said it, you said it. So that's the point here of calling it arrows. It's arrows, because once you say it, it's gone. It's out of your control. And then the Psalm, King David compares these words to coals of rotem wood. So our sages say rotem wood was a certain type of wood that stayed fiery hot for a very, very long time. The sages say that once two men were traveling and they sat under a rotem tree and they took some twigs, they made a fire, they cooked their food, and they left. You know, they moved on. A long time later, it says, they came back and they saw the ashes of the fire. And they raked up the ashes. And as they walked, their feet were burnt from the fire that was still smoldering so long later. So the psalmist is saying these are like coals of rotem wood to bring out this point that this fire burns and burns and burns. If you say a harsh word, because at the moment you're upset, you're not going to be upset tomorrow, but the word is still burning. Or maybe you're upset tomorrow, but you won't be upset in 2 days. You won't be upset in 3 days. You won't be upset next week, but the words are still burning. We have to really, really, really take to heart this in our relationships with other people. We have to really think of this rotem wood, which is used very deliberately to mean this idea of the fires keep burning. The fires keep burning. The fires keep burning. That's what happens when we talk. We're done. The fires keep burning. The fires don't stop burning. We have to, again, some people have more of a tendency to say things hurtful when they're upset. Some people have less of a tendency. So if you know you have more of a tendency, you want to be more careful. But even if you have less of a tendency, as Rachel said, people can be very sensitive, and sometimes our tongues can be very, very sharp. And sometimes, as Rivka said, it's not our tongues are sharp, but the tone are sharp, the look is sharp, the body language is sharp. We're saying this is rotem wood. It burns for a long, long, long time. We have to keep that in mind. Obviously, we're sometimes, as the psalm is saying, we're subject to other people's harsh tongues. That's what King David is talking about. King David isn't talking about guarding his own tongue. He's talking about being the victim of tongues and how the Jewish people have been the victims of very harsh tongues. But there's also, our sages say, we have to think about, conversely, how sometimes our tongues can be those tongues that are harsh, too sharp, and burning for a very, very, very long time. Now, a different way of understanding this allusion to the rotem wood, we're talking here, so nice Menucha was able to join, and Fega. We're talking here about the speaker of evil. So on one hand, we're saying for ourselves to understand when we speak harshly, it's this wood that burns and burns and burns and burns and burns. The fire of our words keep going. Conversely, it could also mean, going back to what King David is saying here, about the sinners, the evil people that are speaking harshly against him, that are speaking harshly against the Jewish people. And the rotem wood here is an allusion to the fires of Gehenna, of purgatory, that will burn against such people that are saying such harsh words, especially slanderous words. Now, one of the reasons, there are many reasons why we view negative speech so harshly. Many reasons. And one of the reasons given, one of the reasons why slander, why talking bad about someone, why gossip, why evil words is viewed so harshly is because God gave us a special gift in the power of speech. It's actually a definitive gift of a human. It's what we're told separates us from the animals. Although, of course, according to Torah, animals have language, and even according to Torah, plants have language, but a very, very primitive language. But humans have such an ability to talk. And that's a very special God-like gift that we were given. As God creates with his speech, we were given an amazing ability to create positivity, to do good things with our speech. Imagine what good one can do with their phone if that's how they're using it. How you could connect to people, how you could help people, how you could build up people's spirits. And imagine how much harm and damage is done with a phone. It's a gift. So because God gave us such a gift, when we abuse it, it's considered so painful to God. Like imagine imagine like you give someone you would give a child money and they use it to do something harmful to themselves or to others. You'd be like, oh my gosh, I gave it to you as a gift and that's what you do with it. God's like, I gave you speech as a gift. I gave you speech to discriminate you from the animals. And I primarily gave you speech to learn Torah. I gave you the gift of speech to study my Torah. And you're taking this vehicle for Torah and you're using it to harm people. You're using it to badmouth people. You're using it to say nasty comments to hurt. You're using it thoughtlessly and therefore hurting even without meaning to. You're using it to spread lies and slander about other people. I gave you this gift to study Torah. That's what you do with my gift, with my most precious gift that I gave you, that discriminates man from animals. And that's why we're told, the Talmud says, that the best remedy for someone who's used their tongue inappropriately is to study a lot of Torah. Because that's what the tongue was created for. That's what our gift of language was created for. So if the tongue is accustomed to slander, to gossip, to negative speech, immerse it in Torah to refine it. Remember the lady that said to the rabbi, how can I rectify? He said, gather all the feathers. Impossible, impossible. But nothing's really impossible. It's just very difficult. So the real rectification is take your tongue that you defiled and immerse it in Torah to purify it. And that's why the sages say, do you imagine how God feels when a person's in the middle of studying Torah and then they stop to gossip, to lie, to slander, to hurt? Because that's a gift. Use it well, use it wisely. So does anyone have any practical tips they would like to share? Because I'm sure we're all human. We're actually all human women. So officially that means we might have even a greater challenge with this. I don't know. Any tips you have accrued over the years to help you speak more thoughtfully, speak more kindly, stop yourself from using your tongue inappropriately?
Sarah, I just want to ask, so we're talking here about not Lashon Hora, but even worse, slander, because isn't Lashon Hora is when you talk about someone negatively, which is the truth, but it's still wrong and inappropriate. But slander, even slander is worse than Lashon Hora.
Yeah, we're talking about both. Generically, we're talking about both. But we're talking also, yes, we're talking about slander, whereas Rivka is saying slandering means you're making up lies and spreading lies about other people. And we're also talking about gossip. And gossip means when you're spreading negative things that you perceive as true. Our perception is not only correct, always correct. But talking negatively about others, true or false, good, you could say false is worse, true, but gossiping is also a very big problem. And as we're saying it, it's really any abuse of the tongue. Speaking meanly, cruelly to another person is also a problem. It's not false, it's not true, it's not gossip, it's not slander. It's hurting people with your tongue. That's what we're talking about here, hurting people with your tongue. So any tips anyone has picked up over their years of working on this that helps them? Firma.
This is one that my therapist gave me. And she said that sometimes, like, if you're in the moment and you don't want to say like the mean things, is like, think about where it's coming from. Like, what inside of you, like, is it stemming from? Like, why do you want to scream at them? Why do you, like things like that. Like, stop yourself for a second and just be like, okay, where is it coming from? Yeah.
And then that stops you from keeping on talking.
Yeah, like when I'm in that heated moment. Not every time does it work. I'm not gonna pretend like I'm a professional, but
Sometimes it works.
yeah, like when I stop
sometimes
myself,
we're gonna take also.
yeah, so like at those times to really like just, where's the ego in it? Like you're really trying to, like if it's something even silly, like you're upset, I don't know, someone lost a paper that you needed for work or something, I don't know, like silly example, I don't know, and you just get so mad at them, why were you touching my stuff? But you're like, okay, like relax, like where did you put, like find it, why it's bothering you, like what could have you done better in that situation? And like don't get upset at them, like try to calm yourself down.
Sounds like a good tip. Going to the roots calms you down and thinks instead of talking. That's good. That sounds very good. Anyone else? Any tips that work for them?
I just want to add that the reaction usually immediate, right? So before we can calm ourselves down and reason and all that, the quickest thing, we can remove ourselves. Just go to a different room, right? Like that's,
Yes, that is a very good practical tip that I definitely agree with. If you know what you're going to say is not going to be good, just don't slam any doors. Just casually walk away and then give yourself time to think and breathe and put things in perspective and reflect on all the great stuff we said tonight. Yes, so that is a very good tip. That is a very practical tip. It definitely helps people, especially people that are quick to anger and quick to say things that they don't really mean, but they say. That is a very good tip. Anyone else? Any other good tips?
I don't know if it's a good tip, but especially at the beginning when I started thinking about that, I would remind myself how bad I would feel afterwards if I say something. Because usually if you say something that you should not have, you feel so bad afterwards.
That's a great tip. You know, it's reminding me of a tip of the Rebbe, very similar, where the Rebbe says that to people that are like struggling with anger or saying not nice things to people, the Rebbe says, I've seen this in the letters more than once, commit to yourself that anyone you say something not nice to, something you say in your anger, you're going to afterwards apologize. And the Rebbe says, why? Because if you really made a sincere commitment to apologize, it's going to stop you from saying those words because you're going to remember, I'm going to afterwards go and apologize to this person. Like, I don't want to do that. That's so embarrassing. That's so degrading. That's going to be so difficult. They're not going to accept my apology. They're going to make it so difficult for me. The thought of having to apologize, the Rebbe says, can help you not say the words. And I think what Rachel's saying is very, very similar. You're saying it's slightly different, but you're saying put in your head this, what I'm going to feel like afterwards that I said that, and just remembering what I'm going to feel like afterwards keeps me from saying anything. I think that's a great tip. I think that's a very good tip. I think something else the Rebbe says that I think really, to me, is very powerful is that whenever we say or think something negative about another person, we are strengthening that negativity. That to me is a very powerful thought. Like if you think someone is mean and you're thinking how mean they are, you're strengthening their meanness. And if you say how mean they are, you're even more strengthening it because it even came out into the world of speech. So do you really want to make them meaner or more selfish or more insecure or more deceitful? Well, as you talk about these things, you are literally strengthening that negativity. So to me, that is a very strong thought in keeping oneself back from speaking or thinking. The Rebbe says it's also in thought. When you think bad about another person, you strengthen that bad. And something slightly different, but I've thought about this a lot, more like for me in terms of, let's say, with my children, that negative words are self-fulfilling, meaning negative words create an energy. So let's say even I'm thinking about something with a child, and I of course want to share it with my husband. Who else am I going to talk to my kids about? Talk about my kids too, with my husband, or some kids about other older kids, maybe about younger kids. And I'm like, no. If I talk, again, I'm putting out a negative energy. And I don't want to do that to the child. I don't want to make it worse. Maybe it's the same thing. I just sort of in my brain think of it a little differently because one is more like in my head, like you're upset about someone, they're so mean, and you would say, oh my gosh, they're so mean, and you're making them meaner, which means they're going to give you more problems. And the other one is more like my own children. It's not like it's more like if I see something negative and I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to look at, I've noticed personally, if you look at things with a negative eye, there's more problems. So if you talk, and this is also true for a spouse, I mean, I'm thinking of my children, it's also true for your spouse. If you think of like, even to yourself, you're thinking, oh, he's so petty. Oh, he's so cheap. Oh, he's so irresponsible. You know, there's a certain negative energy you're creating, which again, really strengthens this negative quality. And again, your negative energy makes things worse. So sometimes I know for myself specifically, I think for me, the hardest area of controlling that is really talking about my children. You know? I'm not talking to gossip. I'm just, for my children, I'm thinking about them all the time. So I'm talking about them. And then it's like to my husband, and then it's like, well, I don't want to say anything negative, because anything negative I say is going to just strengthen the problem. I don't want to do that. So,
But what if you're trying to actually get advice on like what to do with your children? Like I don't know, like you have a therapist or you're in a parenting class and they ask you to, share or something. Is that like?
so I think you have to be very
Harmful?
careful even as you speak then, because I really think words are incredibly powerful. I think words are incredibly powerful. So I think even like if you were speaking to someone for advice about your child, you would want to talk about it without saying it's your child. You want to say it, but in a lesser fashion, in a more vague fashion, talk about it more positively. A lot of times we look at things negative and they become more negative. Like, this is really a great strength. Child is so strong. I know they're going to be great in life. Just a moment, I don't really know how to handle that strength. I think we have to be careful. Obviously, if you're talking to get advice, that you should talk. But I think even then we have to be careful not to get negative and down on the child and really focus on the negative parts. Because I think as we focus on them, we really strengthen them and we really create negative energy around them. I had this once. This wasn't words, but this idea of negative energy, I'm trying to explain to you what I mean, because it's not the same. It might sound the same as the first point I was saying. It's really a different point. I had this once, I'm not going into details, but something was going on and someone was doing something, whatever. And I had a lot of negative feelings about it. Whatever, not relevant why, but I had a lot of negative feelings about it. And then something really messed them up in that situation. And I felt like it was completely my fault. And I really, really felt that my negative feelings about this situation literally created this negative thing that happened to them in this situation. And it's very real. So that's what I mean, the difference between talking, which strengthens the thing, and a very strong companion to that, negative energy about something, which creates negative energy, which creates negativity, which creates problems. So those are what I think about to stop myself from talking to my husband about my children. Anyone else? Any other tips from a?
Sorry, it's a question. Doesn't the Rebbe say also though that if you don't give energy to Ayin Hara, you won't be affected by it?
I don't mean an Ayin Hara. Yes, it's not an Ayin Hara. Negative energy creates negativity. It's not an Ayin Hara. It's a different issue. An Ayin Hara is someone is trying to put an evil eye on you. I'm not trying to put an evil eye on someone, but negative energy creates negativity. Anyone else? Any other tips that people have? Come on, we all struggle with this. I mean, I think most of us do.
But how to handle it if you do notice something? How can you stop yourself from thinking about it? How?
Like we've discussed many times, we change the channels in our brain. We consciously don't allow ourselves to think. Like let's say, like I'm saying, this negative energy creates negativity. So let's say, someone you love very much, like your husband or a relative or a close friend, and you're judging as very negative what they're doing. Well, you don't want to create negative energy in their life. So don't think about it. I mean, if you could, change your thoughts and see it positive and see how it's really a great thing. And maybe that's possible. But if you can't do that, don't allow yourself to think about it. It's something very important that we have to really believe and take responsibly. We are the masters of our conscious thought. We are not the masters of our subconscious thought. And therefore, anything and everything can pop into our brain because we are not the masters of our subconscious thought, but we are the masters of our conscious thought. So when we are thinking something, even if I don't want to think this and I'm thinking it and I really don't want to think it, in the end of the day, we do have control. Or we can definitely work to have control. Maybe sometimes it's very, very, very hard because it's a really, really burning thought that I really, really, really want to think. And sometimes we tell ourselves, if I just let myself think it, then I'll get over it. But that's not true. It doesn't work that way. People don't work that way. The more we think it, the more we think it, not the more we think it. We get over and don't need to think it anymore. And we're told, this is a very strong theme in Tanya, to think something else. To consciously think something else and ideally think something godly until it goes away. From a just put a tip in the chat, which is to surround yourself with people that don't gossip or slander or speak negatively, so it's much easier. And she's right. Chava, what were you going to add?
One more idea that helps me, that when I say something about somebody negative, I'm judging that person. And I learned that at the time I judge someone, heavenly court judges me. And when I think about that,
It helps.
it helps very quickly.
Good, good. That's a great thought. Yes, we have definitely discussed that. We're told that the heavenly court can't really judge a Jew because Jews are a piece of God. How could any court of spiritual energies judge a Jew? So what do they do to judge us? So they get us to judge ourselves. So we're put in situations where we see others doing something akin to us. And as we pass judgment on them, it's passing judgment on ourselves. And I agree with Chava. Whenever I remember that thought, it makes me very, very, very tolerant and very understanding and very compassionate and very non-judgmental. It's a very great thought. So what Chava's saying, which she's doing, which is very smart, is she's connecting it to the negative speech. And she's saying, this is a judgment. Saying these words is passing judgment. I don't want to do that. I only want to pass very good judgments because I want to pass very good judgments on myself. So I'm passing very good judgments on everyone around me. So that is a very, 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 very good point. That does really help when you think about that. Judging others, judging myself. I'm going to be very, very, very compassionate in my judgment. Very good tip. Anyone else? Anything else that people find that helps them? Well, we got a lot of really great ones tonight. So think it over. Maybe just take one or two. I'm saying you could take one that works for you. You can put one in your back pocket when that one stops working, because things don't always work in every situation. But just take one or two ideas and remember them. And it could really be so helpful to clear out these noxious fumes, this poison, negative thoughts, negative speech, gossiping speech, maligning speech, hurtful speech, things that highlight other people's negativity and weaknesses, judgmental speech, as Chava is saying. Be amazing to clear the air in your home, in your room, in your car, of all of that negativity. And again, all you have to do is take two. There are a lot of good ideas offered tonight. Okay, so we're up to verse 5. Woe unto me for my drawn out sojourn, my drawn out travelings. I dwelt in the tents of Kedar. So there's two almost nations that are referred to in this verse, where again, we're talking here, King David is talking here really about the pain of the Jewish people and how the Jews have suffered. And as we were saying, that the Jews have suffered from a lot of slander. Rivka pointed out before gossip versus slander, and she's right. Honestly, we've suffered from a lot of slander. There's been horrific blood libels throughout all of our history. You know, it's so eerie how what the Nazis were saying in the Holocaust was just exactly what the Christians were saying in the Middle Ages, which is what the Romans were saying, you know, like the same lie, and what the Egyptians were doing, you know, the same lies just repeat themselves with just slight variations. So we as a people have suffered tremendously from slander. And individually, people have suffered from very hurtful words. So we're talking about how we have to be careful not to abuse this enormous gift God gave us. At the same time, of course, we're talking here how we have suffered from other peoples. We're talking about other nations, how they've really, really persecuted us in general and in this fashion. So we have here actually a reference to two different nations. It's a little hard in the English. It works better in the Hebrew. Again, we're in verse 5 where it says, woe unto me. So the words in Hebrew are kagarti meshech, which sounds like saying for meshech, for a long time, my travelings, my wanderings, my exiles. We've been in exile now over 1900 years. But meshech, beyond meaning simply my long drawn out travelings, also the sages say could refer to specific nations that have harmed us. According to Rashi, meshech is a reference to the descendants of Yafes. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, the father of all the Semites, including the Jews, Ham, father of the African nations, and Yafes, the father of the European nations, with the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. So meshech refers here to the sufferings and the exiles we were under the children of Yafes, which started with the Babylonians and then the Persians and then all the Greek Hellenist nations. All of that is what we refer to. Another idea is just saying meshech, these like long travelings, really refer to all the ways we've just been tossed around all over the world. Like King David is saying, we're going to go from, again, this is before any of this happened. This was prophetically, but we're going to go from place to place, from Babylonia to Media, from Media to Greece, from Greece to Rome. We're like this bouncing ball that's just been gestuppt and gestuppt, thrown and thrown and thrown and thrown as we get under one nation, then another nation, then another nation, then another nation for so many, many, many years. Ibn Ezra says that meshech actually refers to the land of what was the original inhabitants of Rome. So this term is actually a reference to the Roman exile, which was the harshest and cruelest of any we've ever been through. Babylonians, the Medians, even the Greeks were not as harsh to us. We're not as cruel to us as the Romans, which of course from Rome came the whole, as the Romans adopted Christianity, came all of the ways we've suffered for all these years under the Christian assault on the Jewish people. But the Romans themselves, even before that, were very, very brutal. So that could be this reference of meshech, because it refers, of course, to Ibn Ezra, to the place, Tuscany, to the place from which the Romans originated, to the Roman exile, which again became the Christian exile. We're told that, again, if you remember before, we spoke about the tongue as this arrows that they shoot out, evil words shoot out, you can never get them back, like we spoke about the feather pillow. So the Midrash says this is like the Roman senators, because at the time when Rome ruled the world, you have these senators sitting in Rome and they're making these evil decrees and they're shooting them out like arrows. They're just shooting out. So the whole world decrees. They're sitting in one place, but their arrows shoot out and harm people all over the world. And that's what the Romans did to us. They sat in Rome and they made these horrific decrees. We're sitting in Israel, but they sent all these horrible arrows, these horrific decrees against us. So that was the first half of the verse. Woe unto me for this exile of Meshech, which again maybe was the descendants of Yafes, of Rome, going from place to place. And then it says, I dwelt in the tents of Kedar, where many identify Kedar as the other major force that's harmed us, which is we call the Ishmaelites, which now, of course, would be the Muslim exile, how the Ishmaelites have harmed us. And originally in our history, of course, the Christian lands were much, much harsher to the Jewish people than the Muslim lands. And the exile of the Romans, the exile under the Christians, was a much harsher exile. But we're told at the end of time, as we approach the advent of the redemption, the Christian exile will lessen and the Ishmaelite one will become more supreme, more intense, more negative. And that's, of course, what we've seen in our lifetime as the Christian lands have become less anti-Semitic And the Muslim lands have become much, much more. Because again, historically, actually, the Muslims were generally much better to us than the Christians. Obviously, there were times when the Muslims were horrible to us, but those were like times, periods. But overall, the Muslim exile was much easier than the Christian exile. But we're told towards the end of exile, as we approach the advent of redemption, right now, the Christian wrath is going to lessen, and the Ishmaelite one is going to get stronger and stronger and more intense. And that, of course, is what we have definitely experienced. Okay, I guess we will stop there because that's verse 5. And we're up to verse 6, so we will definitely finish this, God willing, next week. Now we have like 3 minutes to talk a little bit about Shabbos. So we were discussing, and we obviously last week didn't do it because I want to use all the time for Purim, and we spoke there about practical things. But in Shabbos, we were discussing the idea of squeezing. So one thing that I know we said, maybe we said a little quickly, and then a few other ideas, practical applications, and thou shalt not squeeze on Shabbos. We're talking about squeezing liquids. So the question is raised, so can you eat a grapefruit on Shabbos with a spoon? Because when you eat a grapefruit with a spoon, the spoon is naturally going to create some pressure on the fruit and liquid will come out. Are you allowed to do that? The answer is, and this we did say last time we discussed the laws of Shabbos, you are, because your intention is not to create the juice. Your intention is to eat the grapefruit. But we are told that as you eat that grapefruit, or I mean, I'm using grapefruit as a common example. If you do this with another fruit, it will be applied similarly. As you're eating the grapefruit, be careful not to put too much pressure on the spoon. You're allowed to do it, but at the same time, be careful so you don't unnecessarily squeeze. Something else people do sometimes to release juices is sprinkle sugar. I don't know if you ever heard of that tip, but if you want to release the juices in a fruit, you can sprinkle a little sugar, and this will cause the juices to come out. That is forbidden on Shabbos. All I'm doing is sprinkling sugar, but you're sprinkling sugar to release the juices, and that's called squeezing. Though you didn't exert any pressure, it's called squeezing, and it's forbidden on the Shabbos. When you eat foods on Shabbos, sometimes as you eat foods, you suck on them to pull out the juices. That is something we do as we eat sometimes. It could be the juice of a strawberry, or from the bones you're sucking to get out the bone marrow and those juices. It could be in almost any food. You could have dipped your challah in something and then you're sucking on the challah and getting out the juices. So you are squeezing out to get out juices. Are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? The answer is yes. You are allowed to do that because that is considered how people eat. And things that we're doing that are just natural for eating and not really as much a squeezing process, but more an eating process, is permissible on Shabbos. But there are two things that we have to be especially careful with. Two foods that have in this issue of squeezing: grapes and olives. So everything the sages say about squeezing is much stricter with grapes and olives. And the reason being is because the sages looked at grapes and olives as foods that are primarily used to be squeezed, meaning from the grapes is wine. Grape juice is a more modern invention, but from the grapes is wine, and from the olives is oil. And thus considered the main product of the grapes is wine, even though we can enjoy grapes. And the main product of the olive is oil, even though we can enjoy olives. So therefore, if you're squeezing your orange in your mouth to extract the orange juice, you're allowed to. You are not allowed. You're allowed to eat an olive on Shabbos. You're allowed to eat a grape on Shabbos. But you cannot even squeeze it in your mouth, like, press it with your tongue to get out the juice of the grape or the juice of the olive is forbidden, because again, olives and grapes are viewed differently than all other foods, as they are designed for squeezing. They are primarily used to extract the juices. So even though you're eating, it's the way you eat. If you're allowed to do it with an orange, why can't you do it with a grape? Because the juice of a grape is viewed as different than the juice of an orange. And therefore you can do it with an orange, a grapefruit. You cannot do it with an olive or a grape. And then we're told if someone wants to be very, very holy and be careful, that even with regular foods, like with a piece of meat, they're not going to squeeze it in their mouth on Shabbos. They're not going to suck it and squeeze out the juices. It's a good thing. It's not required at all, but it's a good thing. But for grapes and olives, it's absolutely mandatory. So if you naturally eat grapes or olives and you squeeze them as you eat them, like just without thinking, it's probably advisable not to eat them on Shabbos because you're inevitably going to squeeze them and you're not allowed to do that. Now, if there were grapes or olives that over the course of Shabbos, some juice started flowing from them, you're not allowed to eat them. Well, you only need to eat them. But because they're already like so ripened to be squeezed, to the degree that on their own juices started flowing from them, our sages said it's too likely you're going to end up squeezing them. So if you see a grape or an olive where you already see some juice around it, you are literally not allowed to eat it on Shabbos because our sages said it's too likely. Any other fruit, even though you already see some juice coming out from them, you are allowed to eat on Shabbos. But you're not allowed to eat them if they're juicing fruits. Meaning, let's say you have oranges. Now there are eating oranges and there are juicing oranges. I know for us on Passover, on Pesach, we juice lemons and oranges and apples for that matter too. But you know, we buy them specifically to juice them. So if this fruit was designated for juicing, it's a juice orange, you're planning on juicing it, and juice is already starting to ooze from it, but you decide you want to eat an orange. So you just eat, you're just eating, you're not going to juice it, you're eating it on Shabbos, or say, just say no. If the juice already started flowing and it's designated for juicing, you're not allowed to eat it on Shabbos. Of course, not allowed to squeeze it, but you're not allowed to eat it on Shabbos. But if it's not a juice orange, it's an orange. It's you bought some oranges, you know, to eat, and the juice has already started flowing, you are allowed to eat it on Shabbos because your overarching goal with this fruit, your relationship to this fruit is not juice. So our sages aren't worried, you can eat it. But if your relationship to this fruit is juice and it didn't start juicing, you could eat it. But if it did, if the juice is already flowing, no. Our sages say too close for comfort. It's a juice orange. Your relationship is juicing. Already juice is flowing. No, they said, don't eat it on Shabbos. Now, an interesting question, which probably isn't relevant unless you make your own wine, but they say, what if you were making wine, and you have wine, like wine that you can drink from, and in the wine there are grapes, or for that matter, in the oil is olives, and the grapes already are flowing with juice, which means it was squeezed on Shabbos. Are you allowed to use that wine? And the answer is yes, you are. Even though we're talking about how you're not allowed to juice and wine and grapes, oil, olives, but because, this not permissible wine, grape juice is coming out of the grapes, but we're told since it's coming out in such a small quantity, it immediately becomes nullified in the total vat or amount of wine there is, or oil if it's an olive, and therefore it's not a problem. And you are allowed to, on Shabbos, use that wine, use that oil, and don't have to have any questions on it. All right. Any questions on what I was just discussing or any other laws of Shabbos? There's always an enormous number of laws of Shabbos. Yes, Rivka.
So when you're saying if this orange starts juicing, I don't understand it.
What I meant by that is if juice already starts flowing. Like if you're already, sometimes you can see in a fruit, it's already like sticky and like a little bit of juice is coming out of it. So our sages are saying, if it's an orange designed for eating and it gets a little juicy, you can still eat it. You don't have to worry. But if it's an orange designed for juicing and juice starts flowing, then you can't eat it. So that's what it means. And I say, for me, that reality would be Pesach, Passover, because then I definitely have oranges and lemons that are designed for juicing. So if they already are getting sticky with their juices, I can't eat them on Shabbos if I decide I wanted to eat it instead of juicing it. But if their juices didn't start already coming out a little, then I could. then I could eat it on Shabbos. But once already the juice is coming out, our sages are saying, no, too close to comfort. We're scared. Maybe something's going to happen. Don't start up. Don't eat it. Don't even go near it. That's the idea.
Cyril,
Yes.
do you want to tell us a couple of words of why you do that juicing for Passover?
Why? Well, the reason I do it is because we're very, very careful on Passover not to use things that are processed. So since we don't use things that are processed, we are very creative with the foods that we can use, and we have a very, very small list of things we use that are processed, like matzah and wine and salt, raw meat, raw chicken, and sugar that we boil before Passover. I can't even think of anything else we use. So the only spice we use on our food the whole Passover is salt. And it's so interesting because food is always so delicious on Passover. And the only spice we use is salt. And then juices. So we do a lot with juices, with fresh juices to flavor things, because we don't use any spices. And again, we don't buy things that are commercially produced, even though there are many, many, many wonderful things that are commercially produced for Passover, and you should all feel very wonderful about buying them and using them. I'm not trying to discourage anyone. Thank God there's so much out there, food for Passover. You can eat very well from many things that are pre-made, and many have excellent rabbinical supervision. But we happen to not use them, so therefore we juice the juices to both to have a drink and to make ices and to flavor foods and to make desserts and many, many things. I spend so much time in the kitchen over Passover. It is unbelievable. As someone who generally does not, as I think I was mentioning at the party, I'm not like I want to spend 3 hours making something. That sounds so good. I'm like, it takes too long. I have too many ingredients. I know I'm not interested in doing it. But somehow on Passover, I metamorphosize into this woman that all she wants to do is cook. It's very strange. I don't know. It's part of the psychology of there's no food. So therefore, all you want to do is make food all day long for your whole family. So I do spend an awfully long time in the kitchen on Passover, and I'm so happy to feed my family, and everyone thinks it's the best food in the world. Very interesting. Very few ingredients. I guess it's all very fresh, and definitely the best food. I think it has a special spice. I call it the spice of Passover, and that's what makes it taste so good. Anyway, we should have a wonderful week, and take to heart some of the things we said. I will definitely take to heart some of the things we said. I hope it will definitely help me be more careful, be more cautious, be more thoughtful in what I say, which will only create blessings and positive energy all around me. Thank you so much for joining. Have a wonderful week. So wonderful. Everyone that came last week, it was so wonderful seeing everyone in person.
It was very nice.
Meaningful.
We enjoyed a lot.
We did too. Really, really, really enjoy just seeing people. And thank you for everyone there. All your screens are open. That's also so nice to not talk to blank screens, but to talk to people, talk to faces. Thank you so much for that as well.